Hey everybody, young man, what did you eat? I'm Mike, that's Tommy.
Hello, everyone.
That's Kevin. No, Kevin's out, but we did get Tommy back. And welcome to the Quack Podcast, the Definitive My Next Podcast. We are back, as I told you last week. They did not quit. They've just been busy. So Kevin was supposed to be here, got pulled into a meeting. He's making some moves. He was in LA. He says it was for WrestleMania. I hope he was doing some side tasks about, pitching some studios on the Mighty Ducks universe and maybe
I,
meeting.
I did hear that Kevin was ready with like a Quack Attack business card in case he ran into Josh Jackson, and that did not happen. But I appreciate his readiness.
Yeah, I didn't even know we had Quack Attack business cards.
Maybe it was
So,
a shirt he had with him or something. I don't know.
oh, nice, nice. So we will move on. We were gonna record our second movie. Speaking of the Mighty Ducks universe, we were gonna lay out the second movie, tracing Casey Conway's backstory. But we want Kevin there for that because this is a bit of a turn. You can go back to our previous episode where we set it up. I think that's episode 348. We set up the whole universe and Bombay, our first movie of phase one of the Mighty Ducks universe. So go back there, refresh yourselves, and then we will come back for the second movie. And I think it's going to be a good one. I'm excited about it. But that is not the case for today. Today, we're calling an audible, and we're just going to take a sense. Tommy is a new parent. If you remember Chucky Scuds from the early days, he is also a new parent. I have two kids who are 3 and under. So we're going macro here. We're talking about the state of the movies with this generation. We're talking about sports movies, the cultural phenomenon that was in the 90s, and anything else. Did I miss any talking points here, Tommy?
Yeah, and so we kind of came up with this topic out of the blue. So I've been gone, parenting essentially last month, but I'm back on parental leave. First, shout out to my company for having generous family leave for new parents, and it's very important, I think, for bonding for kids who have two parents, and so one thing I've jokingly said, it's like, oh, when do I introduce my son who was 12 weeks old to certain movies and media and things like that. And I think it's like, oh, Star Wars, how old do you need to be to watch Star Wars? And of course Mighty Ducks is a big one, but that's like years down the line, right? But it's also, we're in this incredible, we're in the streaming age where think of any piece of media you ever watched as a kid, you probably have access to it in some capacity. Nickelodeon's library is on Paramount Plus, Disney's library is on Disney Plus. You've got Netflix, of course, you have HBO Max, you've got Amazon Prime, you've got all of these. And so think about your favorite movies as a kid, you can watch them. And also these sports movies, the Mighty Ducks, Remember the Titans, Angels in the Outfield, you've got Rookie of the Year. And it's like, this kind of, there was the 90s renaissance of kids sports movies, and it seemed like they all like made a buck or two, and so they were kind of churning them out. And Disney was in that era of, I think it was Jordan Kerner who said, like, nowadays they want to hit home runs with kids sports movies. It seems like they probably pivoted a little bit for streaming, and so we didn't really have these like kids sports movies anymore. It's kind of like the series. And so we want to talk about, 90s versus today. And then as well as, are there good kids sports movies? And we want to hear from our listeners. You don't have to have kids. You don't have to, have nieces or nephews. That'd be great if you wanted to share your experiences with them. But, Mike is the person with the most parenting experience on this podcast. You tried to introduce your eldest, who's 3, to the Mighty Ducks, right?
Yeah. So our rule was like essentially no TV until 2. That came from reading some books that says they don't really understand anything until about 2. So there's
I
no.
was quick sidebar. So like literally last night, I was like watching like a soccer match, US versus Mexico on HBO, and my son was just like looking at the TV. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna allow this. And then like earlier in the day, I was playing video games, and he like woke up and was like just looking at the TV, and I was like, I need to wrap this up because he should not be watching me play Resident Evil. But he doesn't know what's happening.
Right.
But I do know that screen time and kids is kind of the big conversation in parenting. So sorry, Mike, to interrupt you. Like no TV before 2. That sounds like a good rule. Do you remember exactly why you and your wife came up with that?
Well, it came from a parenting book I read. It's written by a doctor, and then she has a, author that helps her out. But basically, they laid out the study that like any benefit they get from watching TV under the age of 2 is like not much versus what they could be doing going around exploring. So I definitely not judge people who have their kids watch TV under 2. Like I think everybody does their own thing. So don't make that. This is not meant to be a parenting podcast or controversial. Like some of the recommendations in that book, I did not follow as well. They just didn't work for my kids. So everybody do your own thing. With that being
Was
said,
there a recommendation you remember? They're just like, no, not doing that.
it was more like, like spread out the bottles to this certain time frame, and there should be drinking this much, and like it just never worked for us. Like our daughters needed bottles in a more closer interval than what they said, and things like that. So and yeah, there's some other stuff where they're like, oh, this snot sucker doesn't work, and then we use the snot sucker and it works. So like again, who knows what every kid's different, every parent's different. Do what you want. But with that said, yeah, so my daughter, we all got COVID in July, and that's when she first sort of was introduced to it. And it was actually my wife who introduced her to it. Well, she was watching the TV, and it was on Disney Plus, and obviously the Mighty Ducks was in the watch list. So she said she wanted to watch the hockey movie. Watched it over the course of like 4 or 5 days ish, like 20 minutes, 15 minutes at a time.
How much attention span?
Yeah. So like kind of got it, said she liked it, but didn't really it didn't latch on for her. Like when you have kids, like they latch on to certain things and like they're obsessed with them for a long time. Like right now it's Frozen. So like we're all about singing Frozen in the car and things like that. Like that did not happen with the Mighty Ducks. Who knows how she was feeling at the time too, but I think if I was to turn it around, that was almost a year ago now. If I was to turn it around and have her watch it again, I think she'd be more engaged, but I just don't know if it's her thing, which is like a weird thing to, like it's a weird parenting thing to have to figure out. Like you want to introduce them to things you like, but you also want them to have their own path. So I try not to be too pushy on the Mighty Ducks.
And so like if you say like this is daddy's all-time favorite movie, he loves this, will she be like, well, I love it too, or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why she wanted to watch the movie in the first place. Like I think she watched it and like I said, she liked it, but it wasn't like, you could tell it's not her thing that she is obsessed with and really loves watching. So fair enough. Like we'll try again in a few years, and I think maybe 5, 6, 7, who knows. Maybe it sticks that time. But yeah, Tommy, have you thought about it at all? You're still early. You're only a couple months in. Have you thought about when to introduce him to the Mighty Ducks and how hard you're going to push it?
Yeah, and it's like I'm definitely not gonna push it. I'm like you. It's like I want to develop his own interests, whether it be the Mighty Ducks or whatever. Maybe he hates movies. Obviously, we have to combat. Or not necessarily combat. We deal with like YouTube,
right?
And that's essentially gonna be the big driver. And as soon as he starts interacting with other kids, in preschool, he's gonna get stuff from his peers like, oh, you need to watch this, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's going to have that will have the bigger influence on him once he becomes, 5, 6 in school. But I'm trying to think when I first saw the Mighty Ducks, because I don't think I saw Mighty Ducks 1 in theaters. I do remember I had the VHS. Pretty sure I saw D2 in theaters. I definitely saw D3 because I remember being disappointed in D3 in theaters when I was, 10 or whatever. And so I'm thinking like 3rd grade is like the wheelhouse of being able to understand it. But it's like when you're a kid, you want to watch movies about kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I loved, all the kids. I loved Averman because he was funny like me. The Bombay stuff, like the adult drama part of it didn't really stick with me as much. And then I remember D2 I loved because like, oh, USA, And so again, not really relating to Bombay when I was that young. And so I want him to be able to relate to the kid, but also kind of understand some of the more concepts about like, oh, these kids are, from a rough neighborhood, that kind of thing. So like third grade, 8 years old seems like the wheelhouse. I don't know. He could probably do younger, 5 or 6, but again, I don't want to be like, this is stupid. Let's watch Bluey or whatever.
All right. Yeah, I think 8 is a good number. Like, because first of all, if you're under 8, you're probably not sitting through an hour and a half movie anyway. Like, it's going to take a couple sessions. Like, I think 8 years old is right around the time where you're like, okay, you can sit there and do it. I did not see any of the movies in the theaters. I think I'm a year younger than you, but still, I did not see any of the movies in the theaters. All VHS, all like random cable channels, all that kind of stuff. So that it was just sort of there for me, which is interesting because that is not going to happen like with our generation, like, or with our kids' generation. They're not going to be flipping through channels and be like, oh, Mighty Ducks. Like, it's going to be a more direct, a direct
You're not going to
play.
be surprised by it, and you're never going to be like, oh, Catch Me If You Can is on. I'll listen to the end of that. You
Right.
kind of have to choose to watch it. And so during the early days of my son's life, when I was off work, I'd be up with him, and I kind of made a rule. I would be on HBO or something, HBO Max, the streaming, and I'd say, instead of just scrolling forever to find a movie that I think I want to watch, and I'm just fucking watching the same thing I always watch, watching the, I'm currently just like on a huge Simpsons rewatch. I'm just like putting it on the background. I'd say, oh, I wanted to watch this at one point. I'm just going to press play and watch it. And so I watched like, Capote for the first time. I watched JFK for the first time. I watched the first half of Hugo. And then like I went to bed and like I just tried to rewatch the end of it and was no longer on there. And so it's one of those things where you have to make yourself watch these movies that might be a little bit mediocre, or you're not sure, instead of going into like kind of your comfort, like, oh, I definitely want to watch this, and again, you're not scrolling through channels and being like, oh, like, let me watch part of this movie or let me watch this show. It's all very curated.
Yeah. And so that's why I don't think any sort of like movie like that is going to have the cultural relevance. Like, I don't know if we're going to have cult hits in the way they did for like kids. Like, if you're adult, movie comes out, maybe it doesn't get good reviews, but you hear social media, that kind of stuff, it sort of builds. As a kid, you're just going to want to watch whatever, Daniel Tiger, Bluey, whatever, Gabby's Dollhouse, all the different shows that are out there, where you're just going to click it and go to whatever show you want. And I think that's going to continue as you go older. So that sort of, discoverability is not going to be there unless it's like a suggestion and there's a parent like one of us who's saying, hey, this is good, watch this. So that's my, I guess, concern is like there's not going to be this sort of genre of like pretty good kind of cliche kids movies or kids sports movies for our kids, because they're going to be watching the same thing. And I think the only thing that's going to sort of be a shared viewing experience is something that's huge, where like every kid is wearing the merchandise and doing that. So, the Frozens and that kind of stuff. So that's my concern, is like this genre is not going to be there. I know Disney Plus is, they're putting out different series. They did one on Giannis Antetokounmpo and his brothers, and there's one called The Crossover. I don't know if that's the same thing or a different thing, but they're putting out these small like movies and TV series revolving around sports. But like, is it going to capture the nation, or is it going to capture a generation? One of those going to capture the generation the way, the Mighty Ducks did?
Yeah, and what's interesting is also think about how you are consuming movies now. It's like, Mike, what's the last movie you saw in a theater?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. It's been probably 3 years.
So I saw, and of course, COVID really interrupted all of this, but I saw Avatar 2 in theaters.
Mm.
I saw Spider-Man No Way Home. I think that was the title. I mean, I loved it. And I saw Dune. And those are the three movies I've seen since 2020. And it's like, I love going to the movies and I love watching movies. I just don't. Now, part of it now is obviously I have a baby. I'm not going to be that guy. A quick sidebar. I remember very very distinctly when I worked at the movie theater, when I worked at AMC, I got to watch all these free movies, and I got to bring friends. You could bring one non-family member. I was like, oh yeah, these are all my cousins, and yes, none of them are my ethnicity, but whatever, no one cares. um, but we went and saw like an afternoon showing of The Descent, which is a horror movie. And there were like 14 people in the theater, but it was in one of the big theaters. And there's like a couple, like a young couple, who bring in a baby with them sitting in the front. And the baby's like crying all through like the first 15 minutes. And then someone starts to chant, no more baby, and they end up leaving. And the guy was like, if anyone wants to fight, I'll beat it out in the lobby. And so that was a great viewing experience. The Descent's a great movie. But anyway, I don't want to be that guy bringing a baby into an R-rated movie. Anywho, and so yeah, movie theaters. It's like, and when I got a little bit older, when I was a kid, 7, 8, 9, what do you do during the summer? You've got summer camp, maybe. Your parents, if they're working, like mine were, they're trying to find ways to like babysitters, whatever, and like babysitters, like take them to the movies, take them to the dollar theater on Tuesdays, Wednesdays. Is that's not necessarily viable now? Like, Mike, if you and your wife and 2 daughters wanted to go to a movie, how much money are you dropping?
Yeah, that's a
You're
good
gonna
point.
drop like at least $60 on like tickets and like one popcorn or something to share, And so again, it's like, it's very, very different for, I think, for, what I guess Gen Next is what our kids are. Is that what they're called next? Because it's like Gen Z now, then it's Gen Next. I don't know. Okay. They'll come up with a interesting name after the nuclear, holocaust of like 2032 or something, mutant next or something. But anyway, yeah, like movie theaters are like totally different now. And I would love to have the experience of like going to a movie every single week, but that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, it is a good point about summer though. And this is where we might need to rely on the Quacklights who have some older kids. Like maybe that is the wheelhouse. Like summer, you're trying to find something for them to do. You pop on a movie and say, hey, watch this. Like, I love this. So like maybe that is the intro, and that's the way you get into it. So I'm feeling a little better now. I was feeling a little down that like the experience I had and the experience I love with all these, like I said, sort of random movies between, Mighty Ducks, The Big Green, Little Giants, all that sort of genre was formative in my life. So like the fact that I don't even know if like a Gen Z generation, like, do they have something like that? If you're really into sports, like I was, like, do you have movies like that? If you're, well, I don't know what the Gen Z cutoff is though now, but like, if you're in high school right now, like, do those high school kids have those movies from their, when they were younger that they can still pop on and relive the little sports journeys? I don't know.
So one thing I guess I was just thinking about this is, think about like the Blockbuster Hollywood video experience, the mom and pop video store. And I guess in a way that was kind of like, streaming in the way is like you're walking, you're just looking at all the titles, and sometimes you could be overwhelmed, and you just like pick things. But I also remember vividly, there was like a mom and pop video store that we go to on Fridays. And for whatever reason, I really wanted to watch Angels in the End Zone, because I was like, I liked Angels in the Outfield and I like football more than baseball. This will be great. And it was just like 3 weeks like in a row, they didn't have it. And we finally got it and I watched it and it was so bad. But I guess that's kind of in a way too. It's, the browsing and like, look at all these movies at my, fingertips, but at the same time, you kind of had to wait. So I don't know. I guess there is still somewhat of that experience of, there's a lot of media options for us. Like think about, kids who grew up in the late 70s or 80s. And it's like, oh, you didn't see that movie? Tough shit. You'd catch it in the drive-in in 2 years. And so I guess, people who are 10, 15 years older than us are probably saying the exact same thing. It's like, oh, if you didn't see it in theaters, like, good luck, and that's why, you said people like, oh, I saw Empire Strikes Back in theaters 11 times, where it's like, okay, that seems excessive. Like what's a movie you saw in theaters like multiple times, like 3 times, I'd say? Is there any?
Nothing like comes to mind. I'm sure I saw, like, I've seen a movie and then like, oh, your friends are going to see that movie, so you're like, I'll see it again. But it wasn't like, oh, I love this so much, I'm gonna like go back to the theater and watch it again with like the same group of people. So
Actually, as I'm saying, I actually saw the new Spider-Man twice in theaters. I saw it once by myself
nice.
because I wanted to watch it early, like opening weekend, and avoid spoilers. And then I took my wife to see it, and she didn't even really want to see it. I wanted to see it again. But yeah, I guess that's the thing is I think I would see a movie and then maybe like I go home for the holidays and they're just like, I don't want to talk to my parents. So it's just like, well, we'll just go to a movie and like, I know this is good. We'll just go see this, you know? Um, but yeah, different generations. But I would love to hear from, oh, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just sort of saying to sort of wrap it up. Like, I think it's going to be on the parents to force the kids to watch like some varied stuff. Like my daughter likes Mickey Mouse. You could go on Disney Plus and just watch Mickey Mouse for hours upon hours upon hours, Mickey and Minnie and all the little Clubhouse and Funhouse. There's a ton of it. So like there's going to have to be a time where it's like, no, let's watch something else. And maybe that is how we get the younger generation into whether it's Mighty Ducks or something else. I would hope they had their own thing. So maybe hopefully one of these Disney movies or Disney Plus series or movies, sports movies are good. And sort of that's how we get into it. But I don't know, like I said, Quacklights with older kids might be able to help us out in this situation because we are still, I think, as you mentioned, out of the prime range for something like the Mighty Ducks. But I did not mean to interrupt your train of thought there, Tommy.
No, that's real good. I think just you kind of said what I was going to say is like I want to hear from the Quackalites. I want to hear from people about when did you introduce Mighty Ducks? What is your take on kind of how we consume media right now? And is there in a way things like the Mighty Ducks will live on forever. But is it like, are you going to stumble upon it? Like I remember reading something about like, oh, this movie was great and it got Oscar nominations in like 1987. It's like I never fucking heard of this thing. And so it's like it probably, and if it wasn't on TV or unless like my dad had it or like in VHS, like I wouldn't have watched it. And so like I remember when I turned like 19 or something, I like sought out a bunch of old movies and watched them whenever, became real snooty about it. Like I think a lot of 19, 20-year-olds are about like movies. And so I was able to see a lot of older stuff. I remember when I was a kid, I like anything in black and white. I was just like, no, fuck that. Like I'm not watching anything in black and white. And my parents had like Paper Moon, which was made in the 70s, but it was in black and white because it was like about 30s or 40s or whatever, depression. I guess it was 30s. And so it was. I remember watching it, being like, oh, this is actually pretty good. And there was a kid in it, and so I liked it more. And so some of that is just like, look, as a parent or someone who might be influential to children, you kind of have to like, hey, you're gonna like this, just watch it, trust me.
Yeah, right. This is something I thought about with Game Changers, and like I guess I was a little surprised, because Mighty Ducks was such a cultural phenomenon. Game Changers had like a good media push for the like season 1 premiere and then sort of fizzled out. And then season 2, obviously there was no media push and nothing. So like, is it possible to have the sort of, I don't know, cultural relevance that the Mighty Ducks has? Is it possible to do that again with, whether it's Game Changers or something else? Like, I don't think Game Changers really ever had a chance to have the same sort of relevance. But then again, you look at something like Cobra Kai, which has sort of spanned the generations. Like the parents love it, and the little bit older, I think it's more tailored to our middle school, high school kid generation. But like it has grabbed those viewers in a way that I don't think Game Changers did. So I like, is it possible to do it outside of, the one unicorn that is Cobra Kai?
That's a great point. And like, sometimes it is like just finding it, but think about if for whatever reason they made Don't Bothers like t-shirts or sweaters, and if you were wearing one, would anyone say like, oh hell yeah, Don't Bothers, Game Changers?
Right.
Whereas if you're walking around with a Conway jersey or whatever, someone be like quack quack, like, so you're definitely not going to have that.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, this whole talk of like reboots and nostalgia and like, can you do it and how do you do it? Like, I do think it, in the end, Game Changers could have been better. But like, I don't think it was ever going to reach, what maybe the hopes that we had for it in terms of, at least I had for it in terms of like the cultural relevance. So like, maybe it's unfair to expect my kids or any others people's kids to revere something as much as we liked it, even though it wasn't the number one movie of the year or whatever. So I don't know, a lot to think about, a lot for the Quack Lights to break us down. As Tommy mentioned, this was sort of an audible, so we had a lot of thoughts going through our heads.
I have one more talking point that has nothing
Okay.
to do with Mighty Ducks, and I'm curious to get your take on this, Mike. And also, I want to hear from the Quackalites. Like, is there like a movie that you can think back to that you watched that you were young enough to kind of like be like, this is awesome, but definitely like we should not have been watching? And so to me, it's like my first rated R movie was Pet Cemetery. And that scared the shit out of me. I was way too young. I was like 7. But when I was 10, I saw Starship Troopers on like Showtime or something, and I fucking loved it. And like I still love Starship Troopers, and I think it holds up. It's great. So like, Mike, is there like, do you remember like that first R-rated movie that really stuck with you and how old you were?
Yeah, I might have been 10, might have been 12. I was in that range, but I think my brothers or I think it was my brothers wanted to watch Jerry Maguire. And they just rented it. So I was there watching Jerry Maguire, even though, I was probably a similar age as the kid in the movie.
That's a sports movie?
Yeah. So I think that's what like brought me into it. But yeah, Jerry Maguire is my first R-rated movie. So
very good. I watched Jerry Maguire sometime in the last 6 months or so. Still really good.
All right.
Good Cameron Crowe film.
There you go. We are back with the Quack Question. You ask us questions on Twitter, Facebook, through the Discord. You can ask us on Instagram if you want. You can email us, quackdeck.com, go there, contact us. But this one comes from the Discord. This comes from Phila Hoove, who asks, do we know who actually defended the District 5 title this season after the Ducks won it? Is that where Tammy, Tommy, Carp, Peter, and Terry were during D2? So, interesting points here. The timeline, from what I understand, so Junior Goodwill Games, we know, happened in March. That's typically the end of a hockey season. Like when I was playing hockey, our state championships were mid-March. So it makes sense that it would end maybe, earlier. Maybe is beginning of March or February, or this is a year later. We don't really know what I think we've talked about this before, what the difference was between those. But it is a good question in that even if we take out D2, that next year, what is happening?
Yeah. Is there the need for like a Mighty Ducks 1.5? Like they had a Lion King 1.5, where it's like, what happened between the end of the Ducks title to the beginning of D2? And it would be funny if like Carp, Tommy, Tammy, they all like showed up for like the first practice. For like, where is everyone? Like not realizing that they're off to bigger and better things. Maybe they, the league also, we've talked about how corrupt this league is, maybe there wasn't a title to defend, because maybe they shuttered it because, Hans fled.
That's a good point. Because Riley says no one's going to make the team next year. Whether that was actually true or not, tough to tell because McGill is wearing a Hawks hat in D2. So maybe he's
hanging on to the past.
And yeah, maybe he's hanging on to the past. Maybe he's still on the team. So if the Hawks fold or Riley, I would assume if Riley says that, he just goes somewhere else. Or maybe, yeah, I would assume he goes somewhere else. But you can disagree with me on that one.
So Junior Goodwill Games is in March?
Correct. That's like
what's interesting is like they make it seem like it's summer break at the beginning of D2.
Mm-hmm.
Averman's working in a movie theater. And so the timeline, I guess, is just a little bit, and it's like winter when they win their title,
Right.
And so it's almost like, they win the title in like January, right? And then summer is when we first see the Ducks again. And we go, I can't believe they beat us last year.
Mm-hmm.
And then Goodwill Games are somehow the following March.
Maybe. Or it's the immediate March after, and then they come back and defend their title.
So it's like 2 months after they won their.
Right.
But Gordon Bombay went to, the minors.
Oh, he went to the minors. Yeah.
And so that would have been the following year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You would assume, because there was some back history too. Like he was lighting up the league for a while. And then the announcer says, he's one step away from the NHL. And then he gets hurt. So it's not like he played 2-3 games. Like he had a body of work that this announcer is pulling off of. So yeah, I think there's a year in between. And the question is, who's the coach? Does Bombay come back like he said he did? You would assume Charlie, Jesse, all those guys are back. They're eligible to play again at least. But who knows?
I think the league folded or something, or they had to take a year off, or hell, maybe they just aged out.
Yeah. I think that's the play. I think league folds, Hans goes, and he's obviously a big supporter, backer of the league. So league folds. Riley, I do think he cuts everybody, starts either the Hawks or a new team in a new league. And yeah, there's no real title to defend. So Bombay gets out of it. Despite making that empty promise in the end. I think that's the most logical answer, but I'm open to other thoughts and other questions from the Quacklites. You know where to find us, thequackattack.com. Go there, contact us at QuackAttackPod on Twitter, Facebook.com/QuackAttackPod. Go to iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen, and give us a review. You can ask us questions on Spotify and things like that. Drop a comment, whatever you want to do. It helps with the engagement. All these companies are measuring engagement now. So whatever you want to do, go do it. Instagram, QuackAttackPod. Thanks to our producers. I think last episode I said John Hodge was the person who donated. It was actually John Cooper. I apologize, John. So John Cooper, thank you for your donation. And thanks to all our producers. And remember, Ducks fly together.
Ducks fly together.